Theory of mind development is something that researchers have been examining for decades now, both in typically developing and non-typically developing individuals. For example, Hughes et al. In 2005 looked at theory of mind development amongst twins. They found that correlation for theory of mind of monozygotic and dizygotic twins was identical. This suggests that shared environment, as opposed to shared genetics, had a greater influence on theory of mind development. Bedney, Pascoe-Leon, and Sachs in 2009 looked at theory of mind in congenitally blind adults. They found that these individuals use the same neural networks for processing theory of mind as sighted adults do. They also found that these individuals were able to understand another person's experience of sight. These suggest that neural mechanisms for theory of mind acquisition depend more on inborn influences than they do on lived experiences. O'Brien, Slaughter, and Peterson in 2011 looked at theory of mind and executive functioning abilities for 60 children clinically diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. They found that unlike typically developing children, for whom having one or more child-age sibling led to greater theory of mind development, this was not the case for children with autism spectrum disorder. In fact, having one or more older sibling led to diminished theory of mind development. One possible explanation for this is that older siblings may overcompensate for their younger autism spectrum disorder siblings in social interactions, leading them to have less opportunity for social cognitive development. Fink et al. In 2015 looked at theory of mind as a predictor for mutual friendship in 114 typically developing children from age 5 to 7. They found that children who remained chronically friendless at age 7 when they did their second test had scored significantly poorer on theory of mind tests at age 5 when they did their initial test. Zhu, Zhan, and Ma in 2019 looked at 50 typically developing 4 and 5-year-olds and 22 5-year-olds with autism spectrum disorder, where their eye movements were recorded as automatic responses to given situations. The eye gaze patterns obtained indicated that preschool-age children with autism spectrum disorder had a significant deficit in implicit and spontaneous theory of mind development, and that this deficit led to an inability to understand other people's behaviors socially. All this leads me to my research question. While reading these studies, I wondered what would happen if we combined O'Brien, Slaughter, and Peterson's 2011 research with Fink et al.'s 2015 research. This brings me to the question of how friendlessness impacts theory of mind development in children with autism spectrum disorder, as well as how the age of their friends can impact their theory of mind development. My hypothesis, therefore, is that being chronically friendless will be detrimental to children with autism spectrum disorder, and that friends should be the same age or younger to have the most benefits to theory of mind development. I hypothesize that younger friends will be more beneficial because they are more similar in theory of mind development when they are young and likely when the friendship is formed, and therefore may be able to form stronger connections initially and therefore more long-lasting bonds. The subjects in my study would be a minimum of 30 children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, approximately 5 years of age at the time of the first test. Ideally, this would be carried out in a large city or a cluster of smaller cities. My reasoning for this is to try and control for factors such as socioeconomic status. This is a longitudinal study. I'd be conducting measures every 2 years for 5 sets of measures. Therefore, children would be approximately 5 years of age at the time of the first test and 13 years of age at the time of the final test. Aside from the validity that is gained when a research project has a larger sample size, with this being such a longitudinal study, there's a high risk that at least a few participants would move throughout the study. So having a larger initial sample at time 1 would mean there would be more children still available to test at time 5. So there are 6 tests that I wish to use for this study. First is a verbal ability test. This was used by Fink et al. It's a standard test of early language development that would be used to measure both vocabulary and semantic skills. This is a test that has been widely used in theory of mind research. Eye tracking task, this was shown on the slide speaking of Zhu et al.'s research. It's used to see how the child will understand social relations based on looking time. I feel that this test will help really understand theory of mind development, as sometimes children with autism spectrum disorder don't have the best verbal processing skills. A false belief battery I will come back to in just a moment. Test of emotional comprehension, again, this was used by Fink et al., involves short vignettes about pictured protagonists with test questions requiring choice from 4 pictured facial expressions. You have an example of this in front of you. For their study, Fink et al. Studied emotions based on diverse desires, emotions deriving from ignorance versus knowledge of reality, and understanding of hidden emotions. I like the diversity that their emotional comprehension had, and that's why this is the one I would be trying to recreate. Mutual friendship test. Again, this was used by Fink et al., where children were asked to nominate their top 3 best friends in their class. Our study, of course, is not taking place in a classroom setting, so there are 2 alternative reasons for conducting this test. First is to see that children with autism spectrum disorder are able to identify 3 best friends. And second is to track the friendships that they develop to see if the length of friendship and or the age at which the friendship is developed have any impact on theory of mind development. Additionally, we will do an autism diagnostic observation schedule. This was used by O'Brien et al. It's a semi-structured diagnostic tool with 4 observational modules to assess communication, social interactions, play, and imagination skills. Just as O'Brien et al. Did, I would administer this test to confirm children's clinical diagnoses and test the severity of their autism symptoms. False belief battery is one of the most common tests of theory of mind. I would use the same 6-item battery that Fink et al. Chose because their study is closest to mine. They used 4 first order and 2 advanced items. The first order set, where only 1 mental state inference was being assessed at a time, had 2 unexpected context tasks and 2 changed location tasks. You have an example of a changed location task in front of you. The 2 more advanced false belief measures, it draws off the suggestion that more sophisticated grasp of theory of mind is required when a task demands that 1 mental state be inferred on the basis of another mental state. So if my hypothesis is true, we should see that theory of mind development will be more advanced in children with autism spectrum disorder who have reciprocal friendships with children their age or younger. Because the current research shows that having older siblings is detrimental to theory of mind development in children with autism spectrum disorder, and that being chronically friendless is detrimental for theory of mind development in typically developing children, it's hard to know which will have more of an effect in this study. However, I do predict that being chronically friendless will be more detrimental to theory of mind development in children with autism spectrum disorder than having older friends would be. My reasoning behind this is that unlike older siblings who take on an overbearing parental type role, I do not believe that older friends would also take on this same type of parental influence. So some implications if my research were to turn out to be accurate. 1, it could help parents know what childcare and after-school activities would provide the most benefit for theory of mind development for their children with autism spectrum disorder. For example, having them spend a few hours a week in a daycare center with children who are a few years younger than them could help them to build relationships with children who are at a similar stage of theory of mind development, which subsequently could help with their theory of mind development themselves. This would also be beneficial looking at Zhu et al.'s research, because there is a possibility that this would help them with learning social behaviors. Additionally, putting children with autism spectrum disorder in the older grade of split classes at a young age could help them make friends who are younger than themselves. For example, in a kindergarten grade 1 split, you'd want to put the child with autism spectrum disorder in that class when they are in grade 1, so that they're able to form friendships with children who are in kindergarten at the time. Also, having children with autism spectrum disorder participate in buddy systems in primary school, where their buddy is a younger student as opposed to an older student, Especially if this is done in the earlier stages of primary school, this could help them to develop friendships and relationships with children who are younger than them, which, based on my research, would be the best age range for them to make friends with, to have the most benefits for their theory of mind development. Thank you so much for listening to my research proposal. Hopefully this information, if a study of this type were to be conducted, could help with creating social interactions for children with autism spectrum disorder and really giving them the best chance at the most full theory of mind development that they can possibly have.